Love and Blessings, the Autobiography of Guru Nitya Chaitanya Yati, Part 1, Recollections and Reflections, 1924 to 1971. The Hearsay of My Birth. The first presumption that one believes to be a major fact of life is one's own birth, which comes as hearsay from several people, not all at once, but in the course of one's life. Thus I have gathered, without effort and without showing any special interest, that I was born of a certain woman called Vamakshi Amma on November 2nd, 1924, in a mountainous village not far from the Sahia ranges of forests on the eastern border of Kerala. Until the age of 3, I had no idea of children having a father. We lived in a joint family, which was headed by a stalwart with rugged features and an aggressive temperament. Afterwards, I came to know he was my mother's father. He had 2 wives staying with him permanently, and probably several others whom he was occasionally visiting and patronizing. My mother was the only daughter of my grandmother, but there was a grandmother elder to my grandmother who had 5 daughters, all of whom had children. Thus, when I was born in that family, I began life with at least 15 or 16 cousins born of the other mothers. The fathers must have been coming and visiting with these mothers in the night hours, because one or more of them were giving birth every year, until the child population grew to a mass of 32. We children did not bother to find out which mother was whose, and I did not relate to my mother with the knowledge that I came from her. All 6 mothers cared for me, and I called them all mother. Only after several years did I come to know that each of my cousins had a father, and that I also had one who was in his workplace. Recognizing father. The family house was like a labyrinth. The attic, the basement, and most other rooms were forbidden to children. Grandfather always sat on the eastern porch as a feudal chief surrounded by his retainers. There was an unending stream of visitors who all looked dignified and very special. In those days, beverages like coffee were not known in village families, but serving breakfast with coffee was a speciality of my grandmother's lifestyle. Each time food was served, it was like a feast. Children were always served their breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, and all were given milk before going to sleep. Sometimes 2 or 3 children were missing at meal times. If they were discovered afterwards, they were fed along with visitors. 2 of the mothers were always seen cooking and serving food in the dining hall attached to the kitchen. Long before the children were served breakfast, all the cows and bulls were brought out of their pen to be given a salted drink of bran. Afterwards, they were taken to the woods to graze upon green lawns. Milking the 20 to 25 cows in the morning was also like a ritual. At least 30 peasants, including women, worked in the fields, and the junior grandmother oversaw the farming of paddy fields and the tending of other gardens. Tapioca, yams of all kinds, coconuts, betel nut, and black pepper all needed to be gathered and stored. Each of these jobs was done by peasants, and the children grew up like a forgotten herd without being instructed or chastised. Grandmother was treated like a goddess at home, and nobody spoke louder than a lisp in her presence. Thus there was always a frightening silence enveloping the home atmosphere. We grandchildren had almost no occasion to look into the face of our grandfather, who looked both bony and muscular, like a bronze image made by Michelangelo. Such is my early childhood. One morning my mother called my brother and me away from the other children to give us a special bath. I never liked her giving me a bath. Before telling me what she wanted me to do, she would always pour oil onto my head. It would invariably trickle into my eyes and make them burn. Sometimes she smeared it all over my body, and in doing so, she wouldn't even ask me to close my mouth. The oil would continue to taste funny in my mouth even after the bath. Instead of soap, she always used the bark of a tree which had thorns. She would pour pots full of water over my head, giving me no chance to breathe. It always nearly suffocated me. If by mistake I took a wrong breath, the water would go into my nasal cavity and make me sneeze and cough. I longed very much to become a grown-up so I could plan my own bath and take it leisurely. But on that day everything was over in no time. She donned us in our best and also took a bath herself and changed her clothes. She seemed to expect someone, but the day passed without any other incidents. In the evening there was a ritualistic lighting of the lamp. My grandfather came and sat on the ancestral chair. The big lamp with 5 wicks was placed before him, and my grandmother sat on a mat facing the east. She was in her late 40s. In those days, women in that part of the country did not wear any stitched cloth. She wrapped around her a thin cotton piece with gold lace worked into it. Her golden necklace gleamed brightly in the silvery light by the oil lamp. She reverently knelt before a copy of the scriptures and opened it to read the story of the Lord called Bhagavata. That marked the silent beginning of the night. Children gave up their pranks and grown-ups stopped gossiping. All sat and listened to the sonorous recitation of grandmother, who was gifted with a musical voice. I did not understand what she was reading, but I liked the calm atmosphere and the picturesque setting of the evening prayer. Most of us would fall asleep before the prayer routine ended, but that day I didn't sleep. Before the end there came a visitor who had with him 2 or 3 attendants. He bowed low to my grandfather and showed his reverence to grandmother. There was an excited voice coming from the women's chamber, where the women stayed, keeping out of the grandfather's presence. I knew the person was somebody very important and dear to the family. My grandfather's face was serene as he spoke in a low tone to the visitor. Suddenly the stranger turned to me and, lifting me in his hands, pressed my face to his cheeks. Nobody ever behaved to me like that. I felt shy and embarrassed. He gave me a tin wrapped up in gold paper. Why this special favor to me? Was he the unknown man whom I always expected to greet me around the corner? Many such thoughts filled my mind. He had brought with him several other packets and unpacked one of them. It was a special kind of lamp. When it was lit, I thought the sun had come to shine in our porch. In that light, I saw the stranger's face. He did not look like the others. I thought he was the most handsome man I had ever seen. He was fair-colored and his cheeks were rosy. In those days, I preferred pale complexions, and I do not know when I cultivated a taste for brown and black as more beautiful pigments than pale ones. I admired the newcomer and was excited to find out what surprises were hidden in each of the packets. Then he opened another one. I could not make out what it was. It looked like a square box with something like a hot plate on the top. He fitted to it something that looked like the flower called morning glory. He took out a disc on which was the picture of a dog and placed it on the hot plate. I marveled at the ingenuity of the man. Until that day, my grandfather had been the omniscient God in my mind. Now this man had usurped his place. He inserted something into the box and twisted it in his hand. To my amazement, I saw the hot plate and the disc rotating. The world I had known so far was a very simple one. Now so much complication arose from that box that I could hardly cope with it. What happened then really blew away my mind. A human voice came from the box. Somebody was singing. To me then, song could only come as part of an ensemble. The grandfather should sit on his patriarchal seat. The grandmother should sit before him with a big lamp burning with 5 steady flames. The scripture should be placed on a wooden stand specially made for it. There should come multicolored beams of light from the diamonds studded on my grandmother's gold chain. Then my grandmother should sing. I wondered how all these elements could be hidden in the space of a small box. For one moment I suspected that the song was coming from the stranger who had brought the box, but he was silent. So I went back to the theory of our evening scripture recitation being transferred into the box. This was contradicted by the presence of my grandfather and grandmother outside the box. With anguish and confusion, I looked for some hole through which I could peep into the box. I had come almost to a breaking point. The conceptual formation of my brain was so rudely shaken that it lay before me like a broken egg, from which the yolk was flowing out into a shapeless pattern. Nobody considers how hard it is for the mind of a child to pigeonhole things and events and assign to each event or thing a special name and then interrelate all known factors in terms of classes and categories. Now it was time for dinner. My mind was so preoccupied with the mystery of music coming from the box that I thought only of unraveling it. While making balls of rice and dipping them in curry, my mind was busy hatching out a plan to enable me to get into the mysterious box. I thought I should become small as a cat, then grow smaller again and become as small as a mouse, and then become as small as a fly, perhaps a mango fly, and then at last I would sneak into the box. Once in there, I should grow again as big as possible. The idea looked fantastic. My mother thought I was sitting and falling asleep, so she washed my hands and put me on my bed. I was not asleep though, and the idea of getting into the box again came into my mind. I thought I should first become a cat. In my mind, I had already become one. I looked at my hands and legs. They had become the paws and legs of a cat. I wagged my tail. It was very amusing to be a cat. Then suddenly I was gripped with a great fear. Our dog Kaiser hated cats. It was dangerous to be a cat. So I decided to become a bull. Indeed, I became a bull. I threw myself into the air and bellowed like a bull and ran around in the garden. As a big bull with a bell tied around my neck, I stood before my grandfather as if I had become invincible. Thereafter, what happened, I do not know. When I woke up in the morning, I was surprised to see the stranger of the previous night lying close to me. On the next bed were my mother and my brother. She asked me to call the stranger father, but that was a term that made very little sense to any of the children in that home, as in all matriarchal families. The complexity of the experience of the previous night was puzzlement to my rational mind as well as to my emotional faculty. I wondered why my mother did not ask me to call any other man father. I heard her and the other mothers referring to my grandfather as father. Father was thus to me an office of authority, the supreme chief of a household, who should be feared, obeyed, and respected. I thought small children were supposed to call that authority grandfather, while aged people called him father. This concept was now rudely upset. I was only a child, and yet I was being asked to call a man father and not grandfather. This man did not look like a person of authority, yet in a short time he had opened up a flood of emotion in a corner of my mind, which hitherto had been virgin and untouched, like a seed before its germination. Thus, between my emotions and my understanding, a new concept of fatherhood was molded. For a long time, I could not relate the newly born idea of father to my pre-established concept of fatherhood. Afterwards, when the idea of God the Father was preached to me in Sunday school, I had reservation about giving away my loving personal father, so I preferred to think of God as a grandfather and not father. One way in which a real intimacy was established between my father and me was that both in the morning and in the evening he took me out with him for a stroll in the rice paddy fields and in the woods, which had many mighty trees. He stopped by flowering shrubs, admiring the flowers. He took care to make me familiar with all the creatures of the jungle, such as birds, butterflies, dragonflies, snails, and chameleons. In the paddy fields, he showed me shoals of pretty fish going in formation, white heron sitting steady on one foot, and frogs with green lines running across their eyelids and making streaks down their backs. As I did not wake up early, he had no chance to show me the sunrise. However, we never missed sunset. I was very fond of watching his face lit by the evening sun. He always looked at the sun as it set, as if he were bidding farewell to a great and intimate friend. Those hours of silent communion implanted in my mind a sense of reverence and veneration, which was totally without fear or ideas of authority. Whenever there was a clear sky with the moon shining and the stars shimmering, he was eager to take me out. He filled my mind with several stories, mostly relating to the moon and stars. Thus my time with my father turned out to be lyrical in its quality. From very early childhood, I was introduced to the beauty of wildflowers, tree branches swaying in the wind, and frogs jumping into water and producing the sound flop. When school closed for the midsummer vacation, father came to join us from his workplace. To me, it was the opening of another chapter in the story of my growth. I could not compare my father to anyone. My joy knew no bounds. To me, he was always a manifestation of wonder. There was something so fresh and new about him, even in the passing hours of the day. He always took his bath early morning, changed his clothes, and put a mark of sandal paste between his eyebrows. I was never tired of looking at his rosy cheeks, thoughtful eyes, and forehead. When he looked into my eyes, he appeared to be closer than my soul, and when he looked away, it was as if he had gone far from everything that I knew. Thus he combined in him a total outsider and a perfect insider. After the morning breakfast, he relaxed on a canvas chair with a written pad in his lap. I always sat by him. It was as good as watching a man physically present vanishing into oblivion, but without caring to take his physical body with him. Only after many years did I know that he was writing poetry. Like an iron filing caught in a magnetic field, I was always around him. This extreme affection for my father weaned me away from playmates, and I did not enjoy playing games with children of my age. In the evenings, I went for walks with him. He was fond of walking on the bunds of paddy fields. Green rice plants stretched before us like emerald carpets. When we walked, big frogs with green and yellow patterns jumped into the water from the green grass of the bunds. This sometimes startled me, and father took such occasions to convince me of the harmless and quiet life of frogs. It was a great joy to live close to nature. We always sat in some convenient place from where we could watch the western sky, making elaborate preparations for glorious sunsets. After many years, when I read Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago and saw the film, memories of my father sitting enraptured by the sun came to mind, and I always associate this as the image of a poet. Such simple sharing of a father with his son is not very much noticed as a part of education, but to me, what I have learned from teachers and books is almost nothing when compared to the sustaining effect of these beautiful evenings with my father. I was not conscious of the role of his fatherhood. He was a very knowledgeable and patient friend who always cared to help me grow and be happy. Yet he never gave me the impression that I was learning anything from him or that he was teaching me. Afterwards, when I became familiar with the writings of Rousseau and Bergson, I would call back to my mind how the man in the father can relate himself to the child in the boy without reminding him too often of the fixations of father and son. As the days passed, I became more and more intrigued by the kind of rapport that was growing between my father and my mother. The word my here had only a very weak force. I did not have a strong identification with a mother image. It was as if I was learning from my father how to show love and reverence for my mother, just as I had learned how to listen to the frog or the cricket, or to admire the setting sun. In my father's voice was tenderness and affection. In those days, there was a puritanical sense of morality about conjugal relations between husbands and wives. I never saw my father becoming amorous or showing any physical expression of affection or intimacy, such as fondling, embracing, or kissing. His admonishments came in the form of satirical or humorous stories. Between words and silence, he knew how to handle a number of keys that brought different resonances into the music of our home life. Even today, I cannot think of him as the man who was the cause of my being. I look upon him as a precious friend whom I chanced to meet in the strange zigzag course of life. From the earliest days of our companionship, he drew my attention to the value of dignity. It was, however, a dignity not to be confused with the idea of being unique or special or wanting to be reserved or withdrawn. When my father left to return to his workplace, it was like losing my best friend, and for several days I couldn't reconcile myself with the strange loneliness to which I was suddenly exposed.